It's officially the last day of our Founders Week, although we have some activities on the weekend, which we will share with you in a moment. My name is Amina Blackwood Meeks, and this is our coffee morning, where we are going to be looking at defeminization of poverty. I know that those of you who have seen the poster would have read it like an English word, defeminization. But here in Jamaica, we are saying defeminization of poverty. What is that? Before we say what that is, allow me please to acknowledge our interim principal, Miss Dorrit Campbell, who will give us a nice bright smile, and then she will take her cup of coffee and sit in the audience and enjoy herself.
Where is the coffee?
It's coming.
Good morning, Amina. Good morning again, Dr. Hamilton. I enjoyed your lecture so much yesterday. Had a lot of questions. Perhaps we should have brought you back on Zoom and facilitate a question and answer session. But I'm sure Amina will bring out some of those issues this morning. I hope you all do have a very great session this morning. Thank you. You want my coffee?
Yes, thank you so very much. The coffee is brewing, and may I ask, please, that as soon as the coffee is ready, Principal is served her coffee. Our wonderful guest speaker has given us a challenge by reminding us that all Jamaicans have condensed milk into their coffee, regardless of their attitude to health and those things. So allow me at this point in time to acknowledge and greet my friend of a long time, Professor Rosalia Hamilton, who was the presenter at the 13th gender lecture yesterday, which took a gendered perspective of the impact of COVID-19 on the SME sector. Usually, there are no question and answers given at the lecture. And this coffee morning becomes the occasion when we extend the lecture and question you and cross-question you.
Good, I'm here.
Let me welcome all my colleagues who have joined us in the physical space at the cage. Let me welcome everyone who is online in the Zoom room. And let me tender an apology on behalf of our two vice principals, Ms. Kerry Ann Henry and Dr. Roger Williams, who are double talking. You know, we multi-talk in this space. They have another engagement and they will be along soon. Dr. Anthea Octave has also sent her apologies, and she will join us in a little while. Allow me now to introduce to those of you who didn't join the lecture last night, you don't know what you missed, Dr. Rosalia Hamilton, who is with us in her capacity as the Executive Director of the Lascaux Chin Foundation. But she brings with us a legacy of expertise, of the combination of theoretical knowledge to practical situations, such as the establishment of the International Law and Economic Center.
Institute for Law and Economics.
Institute for Law and Economics. We're so privileged to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
You said many provoking things in the lecture last night. And today, in the question and answer, the discussion segment is called, as I said earlier, the defeminization of poverty. It might seem like a dark thing to begin with, but I would like us to look at how we understand poverty. Sometimes we see poverty as something which we can calculate mathematically, and we don't take into consideration the spiritual and the justice and the cultural implications. So how do you define poverty?
You've broadened it nicely, because when we talk about poverty, certainly as economics, and when you see poverty rates, it's typically calculated with a basket of goods. And these goods are goods that the average person would eat. And we create a threshold of a kind of minimum level of consumption. And if you're below that, then you're considered poor. And if you're above, then there are different levels. Now, your point, though, is that it's not simply a technical definition, because our own sense of poverty varies. And so poverty analysis also includes self-reporting, your self-assessment of whether you're poor. And so a lot of people in the rural areas who eat food that they grow, and from our urban standards, you may consider them poor, would say they're not poor. And they're not poor because from their own self-assessment of life, they can eat, they have somewhere to live, etc., etc. So the standards may vary even within and certainly across countries, but the interpretation one gives is important because it moves beyond just simply conceptions of what is required to live. But for example, you mentioned spiritually, there are all kinds of assets and resources and things that we think we should have in life. And if we don't have them, then we're poor. Let me throw in this one. So education we see is very, very important in life. Now, you may finish school and have a school leaving certificate, but your education poor if you're not able to read and write. So the whole sense of what is required to live in a society has different dimensions, and so we can look at poverty through these different lenses.
I'm so very happy that you referenced the rural folks. Let us look at what they eat and how they eat. At least how our grandparents used to eat. I don't know what we're eating now, that we're exposed to foods from all over the world. But our grandparents used to eat something which has now come to be called a macrobiotic diet. So much of the starches, so much of the vegetables, and what they used to call a little watchman, a little watchman or a little piece of salting. And now when we believe that we need to be rich, we have reversed that, and then we have all these diseases that we don't know how to deal with.
Quite so. And so even in terms of our health and well-being, just this morning I was listening to the problems that we're having in the soil. So, we've been planting trees and so on. One of the benefits of that is making sure that soil has nutrients. Now, studies have suggested that a couple of decades ago, you could eat one orange and it would provide enough of the vitamins and so on that you need to live. Today, you have to eat about 8 oranges to get the same benefits. And it's because of the nutrient deficiency in the soil and the chemicals that we've used over the years that have killed the microbiological life that can give me to. I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to struggle with it.
For raising that, because
I'm not a biologist, I should say.
Because we could go off into that, and perhaps we should do that at some other time,
right? Because
we know that one Jamaican cherry have enough vitamin C, or should, as so many oranges and our guavas and so on and so forth. So I'm putting on the table that perhaps one of the things we need to do is to lobby for and be actively involved in a culturally defined understanding of poverty.
Absolutely, very important, I think, because there are different ways in which we should define ourselves in the society. And I think it's so important for us, given our history, that we constantly reference who we are and our well-being against other benchmarks, some of which are good because we are moving to internationally acceptable standards. And if those standards are considered high, that's fine. But I think we have to look very closely at some of those standards because they may not be applicable and, more importantly, not necessarily in our best interest.
Right. So I was thinking of the benefits that people who consider themselves poor could now see how rich they are and the impact of that heightened self-esteem and confidence on our productivity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, we're dreaming here.
Yeah, if you think about it, and I think it's an important concept for parents to have in how they raise children, because if children feel that for me to go out with my friends, I have to have, I'm not going to call it brands, but brand name shoes, brand name shirt, brand name whatever, you will constantly be poor because your capacity to buy those things will constantly be challenged. Mm-hmm. But if your child recognizes that that doesn't define who you are, and it's important, it's not important the brand shoes you wear, but that you're wearing a shoe. Right. And what is more important is your education. Right. And so that your value and your respect in society is shaped by the person you are, you know, your values in life and what you know rather than what you wear. Mm-hmm. Then that can shape the conception of poverty and the pressures we put on ourselves in order to survive. Because we feel that to make sure that our children fit in, they have to wear them brand this and brand that and brand that, and that becomes much more important than the very education that you're sending your kids to school.
So here is what we have done so far. We have said that poverty can apply to anybody in a culturally conscribed context. But there is this fabulous phrase going around, the feminization of poverty. What does that mean?
Oh boy, that's a loaded one. You know, when we look at the studies, one of the things we see is that, and it's across the world, you see it in many countries, that female-headed households that's where the poverty is, on those measures that we talked about early, especially single female households, you know, headed households in the rural communities. And so what studies have looked at is the extent to which that is growing relative to men, male-headed households. And so this idea of the feminization of poverty is that poverty is looking more and more women-centered.
Is that making me a victim of the system? Is that giving women another burden to bear? Lord, something else have gone in the society and I me to affect the most.
Or me causing it.
Or me cause it, yes.
Yeah. You know, it's how we interpret data matters because, and you know, let me say this, I say it all the time to people who don't work a lot with data. No data set is perfect. Right? The very census that we rely on, you know, we still have to generalize and so on. And statisticians have done a good job in helping us to make sense of data. So the data tells us that this is what is happening to women, but it's not because it's our fault. It may be how we're positioned in society where, for example, although in the case of Jamaica, we are better educated than the men on average, our pay is less than men on average.
But the better educated is a recent phenomenon.
But also what you're beginning to see is that shift of commensurate levels of pay is not happening. Mm-hmm. And you have to ask yourself why. I keep asking why. And there's something more to the fact that education would determine pay or shape dominantly your salary, if in fact the data is telling us that women are still on all, when you look across ages, when you look across industries, in some cases, of course, where women dominate those industries, it may look differently. But on average, women are still being paid less.
And this is one of the issues that you raised in your lecture last night about the structures that facilitate and support the continued inequity.
Absolutely. So you could begin to see just on that matter alone, if we were to try to just equalize wage, you know, in the sense of, you know, equal pay for equal worth kind of idea, then we could do a lot with poverty.
So can we also be
justice? Shape that picture.
Can we also be justice poor?
Yes, we could be justice poor because if we live in a society where people constantly feel they have no justice, no recourse to justice, and they constantly feel that the justice system is not there to help them, it only helps a few, then yes.
All right, let us bring your work and your theories and your presentation last night to who we are at the Edna Manley College of the visual and performing arts in our 45th anniversary of existence. You gave some definitions of what might be considered vulnerable. Are we vulnerable as artists? We operate as single individuals. Are we endangered?
Oh, that's a good one. That really is a good. It's so hard in my head to see artists as vulnerable or endangered because I see the rich potential of the sector. But I could see if you're in a society that devalues the arts and doesn't provide the kinds of support system to bring out the real value and to certainly make it commercially viable for artists to live, I can see that problem. I can see that vulnerability. One of the things I talk about when we talk about poverty is the absence of key assets that's required for wealth creation in a society. And it ranges, we talked about education, obviously, infrastructure, institutional support, key institutional support. So, for example, the creation of an Edna Manley is key in that sense. You have such an institution. Other sectors don't have equivalent types institution. But access to power is also a key resource that if you lack that, if you lack the capacity to influence key decision making, then you have a problem. Now, I raise that because when we think about how obvious it is through the lens of the artist and people who know your craft and so on, and you're in that space. Some of us are not necessarily in that space, so we may miss it. But we really would have to be living on a stone in Jamaica if we do not understand the power of our culture and our creativity in the rest of the world. So we have to ask ourselves, why is it that it's not given sufficient attention in our policy making, that it helps to redefine the economy and the society we have? We have to ask ourselves that. Yeah. And one part of that answer, I think, is the lack of capacity to influence those decisions. And so that gets us into another conversation. I don't know if we have the time, but I want to broach it because I think it's important, which is that we've inherited a governance arrangement in which a handful of people make the decisions for us in the society. So we just had our Minister of Finance who made a decision for us about the budget. Went through a process, the process largely dominated by the ministries and so on who, allocate and so on, and then he announced. But can we envision a process in which we have a more participatory approach to our budget, where citizens are included in the decisions about how we allocate our funds? Remember, it's our money, it's our tax dollars. So it begs that question.
Where the Edna Manley College would be asked about the contribution to well-being and welfare and confidence and self-esteem, those things which are not easily quantifiable in 1, 2, 3 terms, but which certainly affect how it is that we are able to engender sustainability in brand Jamaica.
And get the institutional support you need, because I don't have to ask at the end of the man, you don't have enough money to do all the things you want to do, right? I'm pretty sure. And, usually there's never enough to go around. But in a context where that participatory approach to budget making and decision making becomes part of how we shape our national budget, in that context, you could see you would have a say and you help to create the kind of wealth that is absolutely possible in the creative sector in Jamaica. Now, again, it takes us a lot more conversation to drill down to what that means, but I think it's possible. And let me just say, it's not just a pipe dream. In other countries, it exists. It started in Brazil, in a small community called Alegro, forget the name, but and they started this concept, and it's all over the world now. And so, for example, in some spaces, you are assigned an allocation of funding. So in our case, allocation of funding could be assigned to, say, the creative sector. And then the creative sector drill down to all the elements in the sector and say, how best do we spend this $1 billion, say? And so you inform the minister with all the lenses and the perspectives you bring that nobody else need bring, including the Minister of Finance, right? And you say, this is how we collectively feel we should spend this money. That will now begin to regenerate and give life to the sector and do what I think the minister said he wants to do, is to ensure that the entertainment sector can help us to boss, something like that he said in the speech, but something about the fact that this sector can in fact drive the economy.
That itself, what the minister says, requires some kind of interrogation.
Absolutely.
Because what does bossing mean? We demand a level of respect which we have not received in the past. So how many performing houses do we have across the country, almost said the region?
Yes.
When people are going to compete in the annual independence activities, for example, those little children who get these fantastic gold medals never see a stage until them arrive in Kingston to perform at the finals. And sometimes we use and abuse artists. Oh, we have a problem. You can do a song to endorse that or a poem. But the consistent investment
Absolutely.
in who we are, not
Absolutely.
just in terms of resources, but in terms of how we are treated, is not there. Let me just take a break to invite everyone out there to post your questions. We want to hear from you, and everyone inside this room, we want to hear from you. Dr. Rosalia, let me ask you this, because
I want to just make one little point on that last point you made, because you see this boom in the construction sector that we've been seeing. I asked the question, where is the physical infrastructure like the Performing Arts Center that has been talked about for decades? Where is that in all of this boom? But go on.
And who is responsible? Steel Pulse, I want to know who responsible, because sometimes we say the government is responsible, and there is a part of it which is their responsibility, but there is the private sector who from time to time put on all of these fabulous who rising and who not rising shows, but there is no reinvestment.
Right. That's why the dialogue is important, because again, if we were to use that hypothetical idea of $1 billion that the industry would decide how to spend, then you invite the private sector to match it. So before you know it, you find $2 billion for the sector, right? Because you have some kind of a way to have a significant impact in shaping the outcomes and in shaping the decisions. So I think it is a way we ought to think about changing not just the way the governance arrangement and the way we do things, but how we get different outcomes.
And you know, Rosalia, recognizing the human resources and the expertise of the human resources is very, very important. On International Women's Day, one of our guests was Mrs. Vilma McDonald, who has a finance background, but who was very, very involved in the CARIFESTA process.
And I was too, by the way. Yes, when I saw them, yes. I said, wow.
You're gonna have to
I remember, yes, I remember Vilma. I worked, yes, no, ma'am, no.
Because what Vilma learned, I think, would be instrumental to many of our financial gurus. And she learned about the creative process and how we cannot start the creative process with a fixed budget or figures that cannot be varied, because as it increases and unfolds, we might have to consider the budget differently.
Absolutely.
And so we need we need our policymakers to understand that as well. So we have painted a picture of a pre-COVID situation, a long time, maybe slavery, colonial, and post-colonial situation, that we sit down and say, consequent upon COVID-19, we now need to have this gendered perspective of what has been going on here. Yeah. And I think by that we mean that COVID-19 has made the situation worse. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, the studies are suggesting across the world, you're seeing the exacerbation of pre-existing problems. So that's one. But importantly, when we talk about this through the lens of gender, and I know, especially for the men, I'm going to say this especially for the men tend to hear women, gender equal women, right?
Yes.
And, you know, we're clear that gender is really a socially constructed role for men, women, boys, girls, diverse genders, right? So that's a gender concept. And that importantly for COVID, the impact has been differential. It's not just about the fact that it made things worse for women. It made things worse for men as well, but in different ways. And I think that's the lesson we ought to learn. And it perhaps should strengthen, the men should support women who are doing gender analysis, because that gender analysis ought to, and if it's not doing it, it's not doing a good job. It ought to clarify how men also are differentially affected.
We operate in a community where we are differentially affected. Some of the same things we spoke about earlier, about the difference in pay, the difference in management, the difference in ownership, and perhaps the abuses, that the gender abuses that follow those things also operate in this creative sector. So you spoke about businesses failing after COVID. And we know that in any situation of crisis, the first thing you lock off is the arts. We don't need PR. We don't need musician. We don't need no storyteller. So is there any indication of how artists have fared in the post-COVID situation?
From what I've seen, mostly anecdotal. I've not seen any studies that have looked closely at the sector. They may exist, I just haven't seen it. And certainly for people I've worked with, in some cases, it created more creativity, more space to be creative. You know, people stayed home and so on, and you got that. And I think that's true for creatives generally. Any situation creates an opportunity to be creative. But I do think, and I know there have been some efforts on the part of the government to pay specific attention and provide deliberate intervention in the sector. We can debate about whether it's adequate, but I think that's an important approach to recognize the value of the sector and to determine what best is required what's the best injection that's required to, not in my head, bring it back, because I don't think it was at the level of prominence it ought to be. But how do we wheel and come again, look again at the sector and say, how should we invest in strategic ways to ensure that it becomes the leading sector in transforming our society? And for me, that's where I look, because if you look at who we are as a people, and if you look at the resources you need to compete in the world, innovation and creativity is key. It is infinite. So when we, in our society, we've seen that. So when you build a society on this infinite resource that uses all the creativity of who we are as a people, that's a winning hand. If you anchor your economy on a set of resources that are finite, like natural resources, our bauxite and so on, it's not infinite, right? And you depend on foreigners to drive the technologies to do it, you have a problem. You have a problem. So we need to rethink how we inject in our economy and our society activities that come from our people, and from the majority of who we are.
I celebrate the fact that you're languaging that differently, because I want to look at us as entrepreneurs. When we talk about an artist failing, we're not recognizing that entrepreneurs fail. Marcus Garvey tried a million things.
Yes, very, very important. That's one of the first lessons you learn in a 101 entrepreneurship class. You will fail. All businesses fail. And importantly, it's what you learn from the process of failure. It's how you pick up yourself, wheel and come again, and move to another level.
Let's stay with that for a while, because I don't know what a regular entrepreneur is, but let's take a non-artistic entrepreneur. Them have a shop. and the shop never do so well, and them realize say, I could have a restaurant, and the restaurant never do so well, and them discover say, you know, I could have supply fish, but the artist can't change. But the singer, me sing, me tell story, me operate this equipment. So how am I going to diversify in times of crisis?
Well, several ways. I mean, if you look at the industry generally now, in the past, a lot of income was created from getting deals, contracts from big producers that create these records and everybody buy it. But these days, that's not how you're making money. So the change that's required to understand the landscape through which money is now being made means you have to now acquire a set of skills. I don't like the idea that you're fixed and you can't change. You have to change. Mm-hmm. So you may always be a singer, quote unquote, but how you deliver your song matters. What you sing matters, because, for example, if you can earn through production of jingles, say, that's one level. If you do songs for movies, that's another, and so on. Maybe you weren't thinking around those things, so that's one thing. But importantly also, consider the importance of collaborating with people who are not singers and bringing to the table a new product. Innovation ought not to be seen as limited in any way. And creativity should never be seen as a box. And so you have to see yourselves. And let me also raise this, and this is something I wanted to raise with respect to the industry. And we talked about the education, importance of education, and the education crisis that we now have coming out of COVID. We had the problem before, it just got worse. The role of the arts in the education process, you know it very well, is so important. So some of us who used to sing, if we really inject the kind of resources in our society, say in our education system, to educate our people, that's a new stream of income, because you're singing in the classroom as a source of income. You're not just singing on stage,
Professor Rosalia Hamilton, you and me and the principal know how the structure of education operates. Right. We are not in jurisdictions where storytellers, for example, are able to earn a full-time living delivering the curriculum through stories.
All right.
And they're attached to museums.
Excellent
and
point.
They perform at the openings and so on.
Excellent point. But that's the adjustment we have to make. And I talked earlier about the institutional supports that's required. And that's part of that definition of poverty. Because if you don't have relevant institutional support to create the kinds of opportunities that we're just talking about, then you're stuck.
Yeah.
So we have to change the institutions. Remember, institutions are people. Institution is not an abstract concept. It is fundamentally about people in key places making decisions. Now, you see the point, you see the relevance of my point about how you influence decisions.
Because maybe they don't want to change those policies.
Yes,
and comfortable.
Yeah, let me just quickly tell you why that's important. Let's remind ourselves where we're coming. This is 60 years of independence. And our Minister of Finance, in his opening statement in Parliament 2 days ago, gave us a nice long graph of the per capita income for Jamaica. And his summary statement is, we've done badly for the last 50 years, and we shouldn't repeat it. And it's important for Jamaicans to know that spanned the political administration, for those of us who want to be political. We've done badly. We're still not at the GDP per capita we were in the 70s, right? No, that's a problem, right? No. The thing about it is, when you look at that, you have to ask ourselves, we inherited a set of institutions that have not fundamentally changed. And that's true for our education system. So we got people out of the colonial era. Most of us, would have simply take those posts and those positions. We didn't change them fundamentally.
And that's what Paul Bogle was all about.
Yes.
Say we need new institutions.
Absolutely. And even if you put the people in the same position, they have to think differently, and they have to begin to reflect who we are and what we're trying to do. Look at what happened at the beginning of COVID in this Black Lives Matter. All of a sudden, we woke up to a governor general that is wearing a pin with a man stand up on
my neck.
How could it? So, a good example, somebody, one of us, got the position, didn't even question the badge you're wearing. We cannot move forward for the next 60 years on those terms. We have to change these institutions. And let me say this, I'm going to come back to the governance. We need another conversation for that. But one of the key institutions in this country we must change is the government arrangement. Government and governance. We cannot continue to make decisions. We are accepting the fact that we put parliamentarians in power. They go in and they make political decisions along party lines. They completely forget the constituents. When last of you had a conversation with your MP about what he should go in parliament to say on your behalf? When last? Some of us have never had it.
And don't know that we should have it and should
That's the heart of a democracy. I'm not saying anything that is not embedded in our democracy. We elect people to represent us, to speak for us. And it cannot be that they all, when the key decisions to be made, line up along party lines. Yeah. When have we ever seen them cross paths? Is there any issue that affects all of us? Yes, there are. All the time. And we constantly do that and we accept it.
Let us go back to the business of what we do, being the driver for transformation in the society. I know there are people who are going to ask for empirical evidence, and I am taking that as a challenge to the Edna Manley College. Is there a school? Are there two schools that we can adopt? And when our students go out on teaching practice, what they are in fact documenting is how they move the students from one level to another as a result of the artistic and creative intervention. Miss Research Officer, I see you. I saw you. I don't know. See her there? How can we devise such a project so that over a 2-3 year period, we can say, we've been to this school, we met the students at this level on the entry survey, on the exit survey, this is where they were, and we don't see anything else that happened differently except the artistic intervention and methodologies.
The individual study should take care of that, and so the supervisor will have to know channel and guide the student into doing a study that is far more relevant than just doing something like that, but doing something, an actual research within the context of the school at which he or she is placed.
Thank you, Principal. Thank you. I'm going to ask for a little assistance at this point in time. Norman, can you help me to move the microphone around so that we can facilitate persons who wish to make a contribution from the floor?
Yeah, they hand up. Yeah.
Who had a hand up?
Yeah.
Mr. Mark Green, yes. And also those of you in Zoom land, please remember that you're also part of the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, before you go any further, I would say we have a colonial problem with our constitution. Once we fix that, just like Barbados, then we can change the mindset. We can change the institutions. We can work from there.
Not so automatic.
No, it's not going to be automatic.
But it's an important part of the
it's a symbolic that will affect you psychologically.
Yes.
For me, in terms of what you said with the feminization being poor, one way we can adjust it. This is just one method. This is just what I'm thinking of. Education. As you know that, because from I was going to school from pre-primary prep, I realized that the emphasis is not being shown on the arts. And if you want to mold a generation, you have to start from small. So if we expand our curriculum across the schools, because we don't see, they don't put art as a form of something you can earn from or that is respected. Everybody wants to be a doctor and so forth. The UN has us as a cultural superpower. Why the powers be don't look at that as a channel work from that, because I think that is one of our competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
That's just my little say.
Fully agree with you. And that's one of the reasons we talked earlier about dissecting why it's not happening. And I come back to the governance because that's one reason. But I want to make this point because I want to recognize the work of Professor Freddie Hicklin, who did a lot of work in the use of arts as helping us to come to grip with that colonial problem. Because his own analysis and, consistent with a lot of work that has been looking at the problem of colonialization, is that there's been a kind of psychological issue that we have grappled with. I like how he put it, because he said the very first psychosis was the colonial psychosis that raped and plundered and wanted the people who were raped and plundered to accept that as normal. Yeah. That abnormality was the first one. And the second one was the fact that we now accept it as normal. We accept it as normal to look at ourselves in the mirror and feel ashamed because we're too black, or to look at our hair as something wrong with it. It's not good enough. That's normal. That problem of normalizing what we've inherited is a problem psychologically. And Professor Hicklin did a lot of work in using the arts to come to grips with who we are, the drums, and just our capacity to express ourselves freely as part of the education process to overcome some obstacles. So I want to recognize it and say that body of work is there, and we ought to recognize it and use it to address some of the problems we face.
One of the assumptions in that, Professor Hamilton, is that people who are involved in the arts have been on a journey to the soul, and that may or may not apply to everyone. Some of us in the arts might just be there because it put food on the table, but understanding how it addresses those two psychoses that you quoted, and how in addressing that in self, we are able to assist, to take on the responsibility of assisting the nation to overcome as well.
And for that's another reason I think this discussion and this role of the arts in our society is key for that very reason. Because until we free ourselves, we know who we are, will we have the level of self-confidence to take on the world? Look at the people closely who have excelled in the rest of the world. They had absolutely no doubt that they're as good as, or not, if not better than the rest of the world. That's why they did what they did. When Bob and the musicians did their music.
There is no comparison.
Exactly.
It's absolute.
That's what I'm saying. When they created the music, they didn't start with the notion that my music not going to be as good as Beethoven. That's not the conversation in their head at all. It's coming from the soul. It's who we are. We present ourselves as who we are without compromise. And the rest is history.
In fact, Professor Nettleton once said that we consider ourselves deprived if we don't know about Beethoven. But do those people consider themselves deprived because they don't know about Ring?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Miss Lou said it, colonization in reverse, right? We need to take the world and recognize. So it is that self-confidence in my mind that is key to the transformation of our society. It's the self-confidence we need to face a pandemic, not with the mindset that says, where in the world can I go buy vaccines? But how can I team up with the rest of the world to create our own vaccines? We don't lack the capacity to create vaccines. Some of our people are in these labs creating the vaccines in the rest of the world. That's who we are. Mm-hmm. So we need to shape a society
of the attachment and attachment to, understanding to medicine.
Yes.
That our grandparents who never have no big school education.
Absolutely, absolutely. We shouldn't be approaching it to say, and I mean, obviously you can't build these things overnight, but we must learn from it. A next pandemic should never catch the next generation where we look into the world to beg to get vaccine. If we don't get it, people going to die. That's not the attitude. We ought to think about how we solve these problems That is how you build a self-respected nation.
And to bring it back to education, that our next pandemic shouldn't catch us not knowing how to teach our children online. I believe that we have missed many opportunities in using the last 2 years. And one of the opportunities I think we have missed is in educating the family. Those parents who are at home because of whatever reason, and we can still do it, that we can have at least one class a week.
Absolutely.
That we call a family class, and bring us all into the business.
And some of us are going back and seeing the advantage we had, being online and so on. So how we do it. But importantly, the lesson is that we have to find creative solutions to our problems and not simply look at the solutions to our problem. What is somebody else doing, and how can we borrow it? Or how can we copy it? It's not simply that.
Let us see some things we have to do. The audience has a contribution that they would like to make, either physically here or online. Is your hand up, Miss Wendy? No. Dr. Senior? We pause to welcome our vice principals. We attended your apologies. We're happy that you were able to join us. Looking very nice. Thank you. Okay, can we look at the business of Colonial? Yes.
I want to throw something in the mix.
Criticism perennially leveled at artists about their self-management and their understanding or lack thereof understanding of managing their art and finding the right kind of balance between structure and creativity for their sustainable. It's a perennial criticism, and I'd like to hear both of your response to it, because it comes out in the voice which says, oh, but they don't understand us. And I often wonder, shouldn't you tell your story in such a way that I understand it?
Why you looking at me? Well, that's a tough one. Here's the thing. I mean, I grew up around a lot of...
When you refer to the issue of the inevitability of business failing, the fundamental issue there for me is managing all aspects of the business so that it doesn't fail, or that you can recognize the signs that it is heading precipitously to failure and do what it is to create an alternative pathway to salvage it. To what extent the artist does that or has the capacity to do so.
Again, I want to use the response in the same lens about creating the solutions. I do a lot of work in the entrepreneurship space, and I see the same thing I've been talking about, a lot of borrowing of entrepreneurial concepts. So there's a fad that we have to build a business model canvas and blah, 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 and so on and so on. You use those terms. I don't think there's enough energy to penetrate the understanding of our businesses and innovate the kinds of entrepreneurial solutions that we have. And it's, just saying that, right? So one of the things we know, this is the work I did in the Lascochin Foundation. We know, and you're going in, everybody knows, on average, businesses tend to fail within 3 years. It was very clear to me that if you're talking about vulnerable entrepreneurs who are living in crime-prone communities, who are poor, as we defined it, lack these key assets, including education, then you expect that the probability of failure is going to be higher. So if artists come from these communities, the probability of failure is going to be higher. So therefore, we can't use the standard concepts of how we intervene and the time frames of intervention to be what everybody else does. If you compare ourselves to the US, for example, there are major institutions set up to help small businesses. So they get a lot of support. We have 1, possibly 2 institutions that are helping. Not enough given the scale of small businesses in the society and the variety and diversity, even in the creative sector. There's so many elements and so on. So my broad answer is We have to invent those solutions. We understand that our artists and our creatives think and behave differently than a lot of us. So we have to find ways to work with them. And it's important not to put all the burden on the artist to say, you find an answer. You tell us how to deal with you. We kind of have to collaborate, work together, learn from each other, and come up with the answer.
But what a big worm you have pulled out of that Pandora's box. Because what I hear you saying is, let us consider the situation where the producers of art in this society, and many societies like ours, the producers of art come from vulnerable situations. The consumers of art now have no vulnerability, and they are able to purchase the products that these vulnerable people produce and put it on them wall, on them veranda, send it abroad to this one, where it continues to accrue value. It cannot depreciate, and the poor art is still there. So.
Right. But if you think about even the evolution of copyright, what we've seen is a change in understanding and legal framework for copyright. Is not static, and it has been adjusting to what we're seeing in society and the terms on which we want to evolve. And that should tell us something. That there's no fixed answer. There's not a solution out there waiting for us. We need to be bold enough to say, listen, this thing not working out. You see, this work we're doing with the artists is not working. We need more management. We need more expertise. We need to invent it.
And perhaps our relationship with the JBDC could be expanded. They have incubators for all kinds of products. And maybe there could be an entrepreneurship incubator. Where
well, you mean a creative incubator? Right. Yes, something like that. And let me say, this whole concept of piloting and learning from it is very important in the process. Let's try a thing. Let's learn from it. Let's document it. And then let's wheel and come again and do it better. And we'll work it out over time.
What's the role of the arts management?
Right. Arts management will come up. Yes, Ms. Douglas, go ahead. Arts management to speak next, and then I have another comment to make emanating from this.
My comment while Prof was speaking was to actually say there is a wonderful opportunity right here for the visual and performing artists to make connections from early with arts managers. The program in arts management here, what's fortunate, it does look at all the areas of arts. Students previously would kind of lean towards music, but now I'm seeing an extension into the visual arts. So starting an early relationship, because from what we've learned in Jamaica, the artists have been functioning without education. They've been functioning from vulnerable situations. So what if we just master the management of the arts? What would become of these artists who are doing so well without that? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that it is changing. Artists and their vision for their future has changed since we knew artists, say, in the 70s coming up to what we have now. It's a kind of different marketplace for them, and they're forced to adjust to what is happening in the world. So with copyright, the issue of us being online, it's positive, but how many artists are really making money online or understand how to protect their interests online, and how many of us respect the artist's work in the online space?
And also to add to that, that the changes have not come about without agitation and advocacy.
There you go. Absolutely. Your voice must be heard.
All right. Yes, I just wanted to add a couple of things to the conversation. So the relationship with JBDC was mentioned as well. So on campus, we do have a small business development center, new, but it's a part of a network of small business development centers. Ours is focused on the creative and cultural industries. What was very, what jumped out in terms of the conversation is that relationship with even our arts management program. A lot of persons don't recognize recognize the fact that you do need that kind of specificity and focus in arts management. And that's one of the reasons that the college actually developed that area of study. And it's actually unique to this space right now. But you know what COVID-19 has also presented in terms of what is that newness that we have to find? And looking at the relationship, when we speak to the Small Business Development Center or Business Development Council, is speaking to all schools to see what it is that we can develop that is needed versus coming in with a model. But here's the thing now, what I found is any significant change that we have seen has come from a time when you're able to start, investigate, come up with something new and a pathway, but that means carving out time. And that is one of the things I've noticed. People go, oh, the things are there and it's good, but we don't have time. That time to sit down and investigate. So even from in solutions building, we have to say, all right, we're going to make the time. We have to be deliberate. There has to be a specific methodology that has been developed to tackle this. It's not just that things are not there. It's where is the time for us to actually develop that methodology that is unique to your situation and working that out, you know? So
I just add to that to say that, you know, these solutions, we have to look long term. And I think too often we want to get the answer now. I am guilty. I want to fix everything now in your lifetime. But the truth is that we have to look long. Again, I come back to that 60-year graph that our minister showed us, GDP per capita, right? If we move from political cycle to political cycle in finding answers, we're not going nowhere. We have to look long term, and we have to span administration. So I say that to say, institutionally, build your database incrementally. So you pass on from one semester to the next, from 1 year to the next, so that in 10 years or even 20 years, you don't know how long it will take, you get the answer.
I want to acknowledge, I'm sorry, people in the Zoom land, we asked for your comment and we have been busy chatting and not acknowledging. Princess Sinclair, Director, Organizational Development and Gender Focal Point, Jamaica Customs Agency. First of all, big up, I never knew you had that. But thank you for your lengthy comment. I'm going to pick on the part where you talk about how we address the differences at the elementary level between boys and girls, which you have also spoken to, but very critically, thank you so much, how we engage the communities that give birth to our artists in these discussions so that they understand how the community can benefit from the prosperity of the creative sector.
Okay, so
we just want to go up and say, yes, we agree?
Yes, I was just about to say, I don't know what to add there. Yes, absolutely.
So thank you very much. I wanted to ask you a little bit now about how we demystify this construct of management. We learn again through colonial eyes that management means something, but the artists who don't know what costume to wear to which event, that's a kind of management, you know? Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm not picking on anybody. Mr. Jesse is not here, but I have learned through someone very connected to Mr. Jesse, who would travel with our most famous reggae artist, that he wanted to have a say in his finances, but him never wanted the 5,000 pages that the accountant presents to him. And he would say to his accountant, that is for you and for the records. When you come to me, tell me how much we spend, how much we make, have we paid the artist, and have we made a profit? So yes, so it doesn't require the artists to become experts at all the facets of management that allow them to perform at their best, but they have a rudimentary understanding, so they can say to their PR person, that PR they're never good. even if they could not do it themselves, but they have an idea of what they need.
So you've said a lot there. I think how we collaborate matters, because if you trust somebody implicitly, like your accountant, then you're good. And if their accountant is trustworthy. But the devil is in the details, you know. You see them 50 pages of accounts, the devil is in details. A lot of money can be hidden if you don't know how to read it. So you don't have to become an expert, but you need to know enough to know where things could go wrong. So the bottom line is easy, and anybody can give you that, you know, income, expense, net, this is what you make. But the problems lie underneath. And so I think developing sufficient capacity to at least grasp the main things. You don't have to be no expert, but you need people around you can trust. I do a lot of entrepreneurship work, and I start with that concept of trust. It is such an important asset in a business. Yeah. And I say to people that you can start a business with no money if you have trust. Think about it.
I want to look some more.
And you're trustworthy.
Colleen, let me just put this on the table. I want to look a bit at what we mean by collaboration and how through the programs that we deliver, we could begin to teach our students what collaboration across disciplines mean. The lighting person and the performer, the multimedia person and the guitarist, and so on and so forth. And I want to ask if anybody is able to tell us the role of one creative yard in teaching us about collaboration, because we do have this structure.
I want to hear from, is there anybody here from Arts?
Calling someone from Arts Management.
You must know that.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wendy.
Yes.
And then we can go back to Colleen.
Yes, good morning, colleagues, good morning, audience. All right, so in arts management, I want to just look at how we target the students, first of all, the students. A couple of years ago, one of the major discussions in the school was that we should really look for students who are business minded, right? So we start from there, and then we look for students who have interests in the arts. So it's the idea that you should be, or the students should have an interest in business, in management, right, as their base, and then of course their interest in the arts. And so the courses that we offer are related to management, right? So we offer public relations, marketing, financing, event management, etc. And then of course we have those students who are interested in the arts, who have had experience in the arts, but are not necessarily, or do not necessarily want to be performing artists or educators. They are more interested in the business aspect. So with One Creative Yard is actually a company which comprises the students, and they take on various roles within the company to assist with events in the college. And so you will have students from One Creative Yard assisting with graduation, assisting with productions in the School of Drama, launch our concert, etc., because that is also kind of their internship. Even though they have external internship, One Creative Yard kind of provides that opportunity for the students in the School of Arts Management to interact and to perform their roles or whatever they're learning in the other schools. So that's the kind of collaboration that One Creative Yard provides.
Yes. Thanks. I actually had a question, but I wanted to add that when One Creative Yard was formed, it's the idea of the creative industries being a big yard, you know, that big yard of collaborators who are doing things to support each other. So it was within that concept at the time the lecturer, I think it was Miss Harris, came up with. I wanted to ask specifically, Prof. and Dr. Blackwood Meeks, women, the role of that artists in defeminization of poverty, because a lot of times when you look at wonderful female artists, and I'm thinking music, so I have to declare that, who do not earn half as much as their male counterparts do, and who have different kind of concerns. You will see the female artist on stage pregnant, but after a while tour stops, if it's even for 3 months of having to nurse and be at home. So the burden of motherhood sometimes, not that I think it's a burden, but what can we do is that can we identify or deliberately come up with programs to support the female artists in ensuring that this poverty is defeminized, is really what I wanted to ask.
Well, I hope Rihanna deals with the matter of how you can celebrate pregnancy. But I want to answer your question by going back to the point that about the big yard and the yard, right? Concept. It is so important, this matter of collaboration and how we work together. One of the things we found in the entrepreneurship work that we do is the extent to which something that may be unique in its expression to Jamaica, but not unique to us, this idea of bad mind, right? Bad mind, that bad mind mash up plenty business, right? It's a phenomenon I think we need to understand very well in terms of how it's playing out in our social space. And therefore I want to challenge Edna to not ignore it as you talk about it. And I want to include that in how we collaborate as women as well. You know, we can call it jealousy and what have you, but I use the term deliberately, bad mind, because we see it turning up a lot in places where people are, even in communities, there are people who say they move out of the community because of bad mind. You know, we need to spend some time to understand it and to solve those problems in our unique way. But I agree with you that there are some specific issues that women need to address in the industry. You know, problems of violence that have been there for a long time, I suspect still continues. And again, let's turn to each other for solutions in the context of that larger yard where we're building collaborations and we're addressing problems about how to work together, given our unique history.
On another occasion, I would like us to seriously address the issue of bad mind. It has been bothering me that everybody who succeeds to them is the victim of bad mind. And there is a way in which we are talking ourselves into bad-mindedness. The thing don't solve long time. If we look at any of these artists, we see them walking with an entourage of people from their communities. And how is it all of these people are supporting you out of the same community, but the only thing you are telling me about, say, a beer bad mind, don't beer. And so we need to look at the things that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
And how we carry into the future things which are no longer true.
Absolutely.
We went down to Almond Town Primary School recently for their Jamaica Day. And some little boy so sit down behind us. I said some serious thing about woman. And I have to say, hold on, where these little boys get these negative gender perspectives from? Because sometimes we talk about things long after they have been solved.
Absolutely.
As if they're still here. Me can chat here, I'm a storyteller. I want to take a break to recognize and to thank you, Dr. Akhtar, for your contribution. That one of the things we need to do is to engage with industry professionals, both for learning and to learn from.
Okay.
I now want to turn to the business. I want to go back to the big yard. Because sometimes when we talk about the cultural and creative industries, and we have another 10 minutes or so, the cultural and creative industries, we mean those people who we see, who the newspaper come and review, who we pay a ticket to go to a concert. We don't mean the dressmaker in the community. And we don't mean the way in which we can engage that dressmaker to make the costumes for Grand Gala. And because she come out of poverty, her community come out of poverty, and even if they never get to make a costume, the fact that we engage somebody who they know for this national occasion, them self-esteem and everything has gone up, and they find an avenue in which in which they can as well.
An important part of the industry, and one of the reasons why I think we have to take it serious, and it must become the center of our economic development. The capacity for that interconnection of other industries, the extent to which it creates the kind of multipliers that you want to see, so that as one sector grows, it carries with it the others. That's the transformative impact the entertainment industry and the creative industries by and large can have for the economy and the society. Go back to the minister's speech. He talked about it in the context of a dance. And the popcorn man and the corn man and the other, right, these different men. But you can, let's just imagine it for the entire society. We can transform our society if we have the scale and the nature of the interconnections that can drive activities across different spaces. And if you look at the creative industry, you see those interconnections are many.
In the 45th year of the existence, I'm looking at my vice principals now, who've been here for 45 years. No! Of the institution that we have come to call the Edna College of the Visual and Performing Arts. There must be some little steps or big steps that we can make so that this don't sound like the recalibration going to happen long after we cross River Jordan. Is that a feasible project? That we could begin to look at all of these aspects of treating us as part of the vulnerable small and medium-sized enterprises, going into Last Coaching Foundation and say, you know, say we part of it, and what programs can be devised and what collaborations can come from there. This just coming in my head, but I throw it at you and at all of us to think about, and for Professor Rosalia to give a final comment on.
Well, I'll comment on what we're doing in the Last Coaching Foundation. In fact, it's something we've wanted to do from our inception, and we've just had a chance to roll it out this year, which is to work with creatives and to provide the kind of entrepreneurial support, but with critical skills, audio-visual production development. We're working with a young creative who's doing that. And we are providing the kind of support that I think other foundations, other corporate bodies can do to ensure that we give creatives the kind of support, especially now, to help them to transition to another level. So this is what we're currently doing. We're literally piloting. So we're, just trying to look at the feasibility of doing it in the way we're doing it. We're actually rolling it out across the region. So we're doing it in partnership with a group in Trinidad. And so we're looking at how we can learn from each other. What is interesting is, of course, the internet enables that, two country learning at the same time, but also the knowledge of two different markets, so that the connections are made, and therefore the sales and the capacity to reach into the Trinidad market is already happening as part of how we design the program. So we're trying some things, and it's the kind of creative space that I want to invite others who are not creatives to get into, and to form the kind of collaborations and partnership that can take us to another level.
Now, Professor Rosalia Hamilton, we have a philosophy in the college that says once we meet you, we apply the Jamaican saying that say hope will be no more strangers. So hope will be no more strangers. In these activities as well, we have a tradition where we ask one of the VPs to do the thank you. And since you begin by saying that gender don't just mean women, I'm going to put Dr. Williams on the spot to say, would you come up here, please, and say thank you? And don't tell me, say you only catch half of the dinner, because you'll catch the sweetest half of the dinner. Right, and being here for all of it. So as you come, I want to say thank you very much to Coffee Roasters of Jamaica, who was, yes, your coffee coffee. You don't get your coffee yet. Principal not get our coffee yet. The coffee outside properly brewed. Dr. Williams, please come. Because one of the things that we do as well is to offer a token to our presenter on these occasions. Dr. Williams, if you were to open this cabinet down here, if you were to open this cabinet, see the cabinet there, you will see that nice little box. It was designed that way that not only did coffee roasters provide the coffee, but they brought this gift for our presenter. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all right. It's okay. I've got it. Go right ahead, please.
Professor Rosalie Hamilton.
Please take off your mask so we can see what you're saying.
There we go.
What do you pronounce here first?
Rosalie.
Rosalie.
Yes. So Rosalie.
Yes.
Rosalie.
Rosalie.
So both of those make a nice sound. Right, Professor Rosalie Hamilton.
Rosalie is good.
All right, Rosalie. All right, great. I only heard half of today. That was for her. But I heard all of last night. And I was very inspired by what you presented last night. I was also kind of worried, looking at some of the statistics and some of the numbers and so on. And being a father of an 18-year-old daughter, also, you know, when you see these things, and my 20-year-old son, when I see these figures and what's going on with schooling, something that I'm also concerned about, especially when my son at age 6 said to me, I was trying to correct something. He said to me, Daddy, I can't listen to what you're saying. He said, what you mean? He said, you're not a teacher. I said, yes, I am. He said, no, you're not a woman.
Oh.
And that was age 6, about 6, 7. Is when he said that to me, and I got more concerned at that point.
Gender roles,
because of how the concepts that that's embedded in children's mind based on their experiences or what is said around.
Yes.
And so after your presentation last night, I said, well, still there's hope, and there's hope because there's all of us. There's hope there because there are people like you, and I mean, I must say, who has been educating me a lot these days. I told her to, because they have been doing some wonderful talking on purpose in addition to all that. But I'm very hopeful for Jamaica, but we have a lot to do.
Yes.
We really do have a lot to do.
But
thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for making us have this conversation and something that we know has to continue.
Yes.
All right. And so with that, I must say, I would love to present you with this
Thank
gift
you.
coming out of this wonderful mask, and say we really hope that, as was said earlier, that this is not your last time, or you know, we want you to come back.
Good.
We want you to be a part of this community, and so give thanks and blessings always.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. You know, I hope both from last night's presentation and today, I'm leaving you on a hopeful note that we are the most creative people in the world. Yeah. We have the most resilient people in the world, and we can create a future that can make all of us go proud. So I absolutely feel confident about the future. The data may look grim and our reality may look grim, but what is not grim in my mind is the awesome capacity of the Jamaican people to overcome any circumstance put in front of us. Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you.
You will come again. Please join us for coffee. Those of you who are in the room. Okay, next year it's going to name coffee, hot chocolate tea.
Yes, absolutely. And we get to some last chocolate too.
Oh, wonderful.
Hot chocolate, absolutely.
Oh, did you hear that? Next coffee morning, we're calling up Professor Rosalie for the hot chocolate. Thanks, everyone. Those of you who are close by or far by, I'm sure we have enough coffee that we can share with you. And we thank again Coffee Roasters of Jamaica, who have already expressed that they are no more strangers and we can have coffee for these events. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again.
Multimedia.
Thank you.
Thanks to the team, everybody. Bless you. Have a great day.
All right. Wonderful. Oh, boy.